Hello everyone, and this is my review for TNA Impact Wrestling on January 10th, 2013. And I'm going to go off and say right from the get-go, I felt like this show being the go-home show to one of now only going to be one of four major pay-per-views they're going to do this year. I'll get into that into a different video, what TNA is actually going to be doing with the pay-per-view structure this year in a different video, probably tomorrow. But this being the go-home show to TNA Genesis, honestly, I felt like they put too much focus onto what was going on even with next week versus just what's going on at the pay-per-view itself. They put a lot of emphasis on certain storylines, mainly with the Aces and Eights storyline, where it was going with Mr. Anderson and everything like that. It felt like they were going more towards what was going to be with next week's Impact versus what's going down with the pay-per-view itself. Now, granted, you did have excellent matches on there, and you did get some storylines towards the pay-per-view itself, but you did not really get. I didn't get a sense that they were going into pay-per-view the next week, with the exception of the world title situation, the tag match with Austin Aries and Bobby Roode and James Storm and Jeff Hardy. That was extremely well done in my mind, and conveyed the point of the both of them, both Austin Aries and Bobby Roode. Even though they do not like each other, they will somewhat work together to get rid of Jeff Hardy in some way, shape, or form, or at least try to make sure he was hurt going into the actual pay-per-view match itself. So that was extremely well done in my mind. I also like the continuation with the X Division. The X Division tournament with Zema Ion and Kenny King. Obviously, Kenny King going into the pay-per-view match with Christian York. The winner goes on to face RVD later that night. I like where they're going with that, mainly just because of the fact that now going into the pay-per-view, the X Division title actually has at least a little bit of a story instead of something they kind of just thrown together at the last moment. One thing I definitely didn't end up liking was the whole Robbie T test marker, Miss Testmarker deal. They had the mixed tag match earlier in the night with Jesse and Tara and Robbie T and Miss Testmarker, and just I did not really feel like what was the purpose of Miss Testmarker being there. They could have come up with some other knockout to go out there in this sense, with the exception of maybe that they're attempting to turn Robbie T face in some way, shape, or form, or he'll turn on Robbie E at some point. But it came off really quirky, really silly to me in my mind, and it didn't really come off all that great. Earlier in the night, you had, or not earlier in the night, basically the way they started the show was with Sting, Samoa Joe, and Kurt Angle out there talking about what they were going to do about Aces and Eights. Of course, they call out Mr. Anderson, Kurt Angle does, which eventually leads to a quick brawl, and then of course what was supposed to be a match between Kurt Angle and Mr. Anderson later in the night. That didn't happen, of course, mainly because of not because of Mr. Anderson, but because Angle got attacked by Knox of one of the Aces and Eights in there, and obviously he's attempting to earn his way back onto the table because he lost his mask. I see where they're going with that. If you lose your mask, you got to earn your way back in some way, shape, or form, and this was his way of doing it. That eventually did lead to his match with Sting later in that night, which was an okay match in that sense. Sting, of course, going over. Their segment with where they captured Brooke Hogan when Sting was about to take out Knox was interesting, which also led to Bully Ray showing back up. This is where it kind of lost track of where they were going, at least in my mind, where it felt like they were building more towards next week versus the pay-per-view itself. You had the segment with Hogan and Bully Ray and Brooke in the ring, and they had eventually it led to an argument between Hogan and Bully, which eventually led to Bully proposing to Brooke Hogan to marry him. Of course, she says yes. We get a wedding next week. Honestly, I don't it's a wrestling wedding, so you know what to expect from it. Some kind of chaos will happen. Something will go haywire in some way, shape, or form. But all in all, at that point, it felt like they were building more towards the next week versus building into the pay-per-view and building for some conclusions in there. I mean, it would have been nice with the fact that they have a couple extra matches in there, especially with the Aces and Eights area. It would have been nice to see Joseph Parks come out there during that point, because he's supposed to have a match with Devon at the pay-per-view. You saw him in the segment earlier in the show with Hulk Hogan, where he said, yes, you can have any kind of match you want, and it was later announced he was going to be with Devon. He doesn't appear during the Aces and Eights segment later in the show. It would have also been nice to see some kind of one-on-one interaction with Doc and Sting, considering the fact that they have a match as well. Would have also liked to have seen some more time with Joey Ryan and Matt Morgan with the tag team titles. You had a little quick segment in there where they performed a beatdown, but it didn't really seem something that would push you into a pay-per-view type match at that point. It felt like it was something that was building upon a feud, but it didn't feel like that was the final thing you would see before going into the pay-per-view itself. Would have liked to have seen some more with that. Also, I did not understand why, considering the fact it wasn't considered open fight night, that they decided to have a gut check with 2 contestants in there. I'm okay with the fact that they do gut check and everything, but it makes more sense when it's on open fight night versus on just especially a go home show right before the pay-per-view. So all in all, it felt like this week's Impact going into the pay-per-view, it just felt like it was all over the place, at least in my mind. It didn't come off all that great. It didn't really push towards their pay-per-view all that well, with the exception of a few areas, of course. They did really well in certain areas about the pay-per-view, but they didn't make it a mishmash of what the whole pay-per-view card was going to be, and building the stories around all those different matches going into the pay-per-view itself. So yeah, that's my review for TNA Impact Wrestling this week. I thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.